Theo, you ready? Good evening, everybody. Thanks for your patience there. We just need to finalize a couple of things to get started. So welcome to our June 18th meeting, and we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And looking for a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
The first and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries. And we've got a couple of speakers for our public comment this evening. And as we call the speakers up, they'll have 3 minutes to speak. Our first speaker this evening is Mr. Carson Cohn. Mr. Cohn, welcome. Good to see you again. Mr. Cohn, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Imagine you haven't eaten anything in 2 days. Sorry, I'm just kind of having memories. Imagine you haven't eaten anything in 2 days, so your stomach hurts and you're irritable. Imagine you have creditors and collection agencies constantly calling you as you know your credit score is dropping, and along with it, your chances of ever owning a home. Imagine you slept outside in below freezing temperatures last night because you have no home, but only a possibility of sleeping in a shelter where you will not be able to sleep due to screaming and erratic behavior of others staying there. Imagine your lack of a steady home keeps you from being able to see your kids. Imagine that your one and only hope of a better life is a grocery store job down I-77 South, but that with all the chaos in your life, you can't afford to wait around for the bus and your few belongings would only fit in your rundown car. Imagine the grocery store wants you to work 7 days a week and that there is no way you can afford to if you get a voucher that has 10 uses per month. Imagine your only hope of escape from poverty is to have one board member here this evening have the courageousness to speak up and help by requesting that the unlimited use voucher be allowed for use 62 times per month so that you can make it to work every day and back, earn a decent living, and have a shot to advance economically and contribute to society. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cohn. We appreciate you. Our next speaker, Mr. Robert McCutcheon with the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance. Mr. McCutcheon. Welcome, sir. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Hello and good evening. My name is Robert McCutcheon. I'm the president and CEO of the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance. I joined the Alliance in March of this year to continue the important work of representing and advocating as the voice of business and economic development for the region around Charlotte. Madam Chair, members of the board, thank you for your leadership in transportation planning across this region. In my career, I've had the good fortune of being in executive positions across industries and in companies of all sizes, from Fortune 500 to small business. I understand the importance of reliable transportation network for local employees and global economies alike. Your work on long-term transportation strategies is just incredibly important for our region. The Alliance, and even back to the legacy Charlotte Chamber of Commerce, is unwavering in our support of public-private partnerships, and particularly unlocking private sector innovation and efficiency to solve some of our greatest challenges as a community. Congestion on our major corridors is just one strain on our local economy that hinders both commuters and commerce. You'll recall that our organization is tracking this issue closely, and we appeared here several times to speak, most recently in September. as you all have successfully worked through this collaborative and uniquely transparent process with NCDOT. You have heard the stats about the tremendous growth within our region, and I'm sure you feel the increased pressure on our transportation network every day, as I do too. And although the congestion problem is complex, given the available options for adding capacity to I-77 South, the solution has become clear throughout this multi-year process. So by supporting the P3 delivery method, your board has kept the largest transportation project in the state moving. Leveraging private sector investment on I-77 will rapidly address a complex problem that otherwise simply lacks a viable financial path forward. I'm here to once more express the business community's incredible appreciation for the efforts of the working group and further support the CRTPO partnering with NCDOT to improve I-77 South using a P3 delivery method. The future of this project is incredibly important to our region's vitality. Thank you all for your commitment to seeing this through and finding a solution that adds capacity and manages traffic as soon as possible. The business community looks forward to following the next steps as NCDOT carries the competitive bid process forward for our region. Thank you for seeing this through, and thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Mr. McCutcheon. We appreciate you. All right, board, we'll move on through the agenda here. Item number 4, ethics awareness and conflict of interest reminder. Neil, will you help us with that?
In accordance with the State Government Ethics Act, it is the duty of every board member to avoid conflict of interest. Does any board member have any known conflict of interest with respect to any of the matters coming before the board today? If so, please identify the conflict and refrain from any participation in the particular matter involved.
Okay. Hearing none, we'll move on. Agenda item 5, our consent agenda, as we've presented those. Can we get a motion? Gosh, I think we've got the whole board that motion.
Second.
Thank you.
All right. We've got a first and a second. All those in favor say aye. Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Agenda item number 6, our NCDOT I-77 South Express Lanes update. And Brett Knipe and Carly Swanson will provide us the update. You also have a copy at your individual space. There's a printout of the presentation this evening in case you want to make notes for questions. So Brett and Carly, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good to be back again. Wanted to provide the group another update on the I-77 South Express Lanes project. Carly is joining me once again for that presentation. Before I get into that, though, I did want to introduce our new Division 10 engineer, Felix Obregon, right back there in the corner. So recommend everybody get to know Felix. I joked with him and told him that I was going to tell everybody to get his cell phone number and delete mine, but still feel free to call me anytime. But really, I know that Division 10 is going to be in good hands with Felix. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. So we'll talk again about the project. I know it's going to be slides that you've all seen before, but we'll cover what the project is. We'll talk about the timeline and what we've done since October when the working group was formed after the MPO approved us to move forward with a P3 delivery for the project. And Carly's going to get into a detailed discussion about the working group and the key terms that were developed and how that has progressed. And then we'll close with next steps. So again, this is the I-57-18 project. That's the I-77 South project that extends from the South Carolina state line up to uptown Charlotte, up to the Brookshire Freeway. And the scope of the project is to include express lanes, 2 in each direction. And that's going to require reconstruction of all the interchanges or nearly all the interchanges in the corridor. It's going to include direct connect access points at certain locations and all along the corridor. And as was mentioned a moment ago, this is the most expensive project the state has ever considered, with a current year estimate of $3.2 billion. And also, as I've mentioned before, crash rates on this corridor are at least 2.5 times higher than other similar urban corridors. And as I've mentioned again, as Mecklenburg County, this is a common challenge in the county, is the congested roadways that we all face ultimately lead to higher crash rates, and Mecklenburg County leads the state, unfortunately, in crash rates. So that, again, is an aspect of the project that I always like to point out. So I want to cover the timeline. And you all have seen this slide many times as we've been coming to you for the last several years now. But to remind everyone, this project was initiated essentially from a study that was completed or started back in 2007, the Fast Lane study that identified managed lanes corridors and other toll facilities such as the Monroe Expressway in the Charlotte region. That was a collaborative effort. It was a group from NCDOT, South Carolina DOT, and MUMPO, CRTPO's former name was MUMPO, right? So that's how long ago this project started to be discussed. It took all the way to 2014 before it was adopted into the local MTP. And the CRTPO at the time submitted this project into the STIP for scoring purposes. And so we ranked it in the STIP for the first time in 2014. And then moving forward a couple of years, again, we were actually able to program it in the STIP in the P 5.0 cycle. And we began our planning and design work. And that planning and design work has carried on since that time. And that's ultimately what's led us today to the concept designs that we've been developing over the last several years in collaboration with the Charlotte Department of Transportation. And so moving forward a couple of years, we were able to identify in the last draft STIP $600 million worth of state funding for this project. And remind everyone again, this is at least a $3.2 billion project. And so we've got that funding gap, and that's where the P3 delivery was identified as really the only method that we could deliver this project successfully. And then October of last year, you guys approved NCDOT to move forward with the P3 delivery for the project. And since that time, we've continued that project development work. That's referred to as the NEPA development process. We've continued with public engagement, very intense level of public engagement. We've met with 18 different groups, community and business groups in and around the corridor, and touched at least 450 people. So that number, each time we come back and talk about this project, that number continues to grow, and we have plans to continue that throughout the summer and into the fall, where we'll get into the actual public meeting for the project. We did host a regional DBE event in March, and the I-77 project was a focus point. And we discussed that this would be a great contracting opportunity for the disadvantaged business enterprise community. And also, I think the main focus tonight's presentation that Carly's going to get into to talk about CRTPO's working group that we all developed together. You know, we reviewed peer contracts to compare this project to it. We talked to folks in Virginia DOT, Texas DOT, and we've met with 13 independent concessionaire groups that were interested in the projects for a total of 22 meetings with those people. So we've been taking a really collaborative approach to this the whole time. Feel pretty good about where things stand in terms of the market and the interest. And again, we presented this last month's meeting, a quick update, but since we sent out the email with the full indicative terms, which we'll get a full overview of here just in a few minutes, on June the 2nd, that's when our 60-day review window began. And so we want to continue having that open conversation during that time period. I'm going to turn it over to Carly for a working group update.
Good evening, members of the board. As Brett said, I'm Carly Swanson. Next, I'm going to walk through the key terms that were developed by the working group over the last 7 months. I did want to note too, while NCDOT is up here presenting this, I did want to recognize the 12 board members that have participated in this process over the last 7 months. A lot of work went into this, and, being able to incorporate the priorities from the different working group members and from this board is very important through that process. Did also want to note too, the working group is not something that took place before I-77 North. So this level of engagement on a project like this is unprecedented. So again, thank you to those board members who helped participate in this. So just to briefly walk through how we got to where we are today. As Brett mentioned, late last year, CRTPO requested NCDOT to move forward with the P3 delivery process in October. From there, we did create the working group with 12 CRTPO board members to develop project objectives and priorities, which helped us inform indicative terms. Now, in presenting to this board over the course of several months, we did identify some key priorities that you see bulleted out here. So optimizing the utilization of express lanes and the general purpose lanes, encouraging a competitive procurement process to receive multiple fixed price bids, increasing transparency through all phases of the project, not just where we're at here and now, but also once the project is open to traffic, as well as providing benefits to transit. As we've been able to work through the working group process, all of these priorities here have been incorporated, as you'll see in the terms and through the process. The schedule here is what we presented to you all in October. You see that there were 4 stars here. Those represented the working group meetings. The working group finalized the key terms last meeting in May. We did have an office hour session, and thank you to those board members that did stop by this afternoon. We appreciate your involvement on that. And where we are at today is presenting those key terms to you all that we shared with you on email on June 2nd. So just as a reminder, the approach here and our goal was to establish clear project objectives and priorities that will shape the key commercial and competitive terms for the I-77 South Express Lanes project. And then you may have seen this scale slide before, but it's just a reminder that we do have $600 million in state funding. So as we worked through those priorities from the working group, we had to make sure that we were balancing everything out, staying within that budget to make sure that the financial viability did pencil out. We know that competition is a big priority for you all, and it's a priority for the department as well. We want to receive multiple fixed price bids. So as part of that process, we did take the key terms to the market twice. You'll remember Brett said we did meet with developers, had 22 different meetings. So after the priorities were identified, we then identified the key impacted terms, took those terms to the market, met with them to see if there were any concerns, took the terms back to the working group. And then after the working group went through and we updated the draft, we took it back out to the market. So we also engaged developers along the way, and we actually saw an increase in interest in the project from a number of developers as well. Where we're at today is the completion of the key terms. So after we identified the project priorities, we took them into 2 categories. So the first category is the low financial impact priorities. So those are simple to address and can be incorporated with minimal complexity. An example of that is allowing transit to use the express lanes toll-free. Some of you all may know that on I-77 North, CATS is able to use the express lanes for free. That's something that was also identified as a priority for I-77 South. So that's something that is a key term that we plan on incorporating. Now, for high financial impacts, those are more complex issues with significant financial implications, which required the working group to prioritize, as not all of the items may be included in the contract. So an example of a high financial impact priority: implementing toll rate caps to increase utilization of the express lanes. On I-77 North, the developer can charge whatever toll rate at whatever time of day. There are no toll rate caps. But what we have heard from you all and what we have heard from the working group is you want to see a cap on the rates to ensure that we are increasing the utilization in the express lanes and keeping rates as low as possible for drivers. So next, I'm going to walk through the key terms. So you see the couple of pictures here. That is a graphic of the low financial impact priorities. So in the email that we shared with you on June 2nd, that's what the low financial impact document looks like. We also posted this document up on the NCDOT website on the project page, so members of the public could look at this as well. But for the low financial impact priorities, you'll see them listed out here. We will go through those next. But for us, the focus is really on transparency, as well as toll rates during emergency declarations, safety as it relates to marking and lighting in the express lanes, more transparent toll rates, real-time road conditions, performance reporting, transit, as we talked about earlier, and then DBE, your disadvantaged business enterprise outreach. So we will walk through those terms next. All right, so you'll see here on the left, the priority type, they are grouped into different priorities. So first we'll start with toll policy, corridor safety, and transparency. So first, for toll policy, toll rates during emergency declarations. So this term is really focused on regulating toll rates during emergencies to ensure accessibility. In talking with Councilwoman Simpson Wesley, this was a priority for her. We obviously learned a lot from Hurricane Helene from the department's perspective, ensuring that, for one, ensuring that rates are regulated during an emergency declaration. If I-77 is identified as a detour route, making sure that drivers are not being charged more than what is needed. And then if 77 is also deemed an evacuation route, making sure that toll rates are waived. Corridor safety. So on I-77 North, we do allow emergency response teams to use the express lanes for free. That is something that we would want to implement on I-77 South as well. So from a safety perspective, markings and lighting on the facility, so making sure that we have high visibility road markings and reflective surfaces while ensuring that there's adequate lighting throughout the corridor. Transparency was also a big priority for the working group. So transparent toll rates. So we want to make sure from a driver's perspective that there are user-friendly platforms that display historical toll data, but also predictive pricing to help give drivers more of a heads up of what they could potentially pay well before they decide whether to use the lanes. Additionally, real-time road condition updates, so implementing technology that helps drivers and shares live updates on traffic conditions and incidents and lane availability. And then performance reporting, so making sure that we are transparent with the reporting of the express lanes and the performance, so publishing regular reports that are available for the public to look at that details the express lane performance. The next two priority types include transit. So as I mentioned earlier, transit usage of express lanes for free, so allowing transit vehicles to ride toll-free. Something that is different from North that we heard is a priority for South is also incorporating microtransit to be able to use the express lanes for free. Additionally, providing real-time transit information systems. So for travelers, if they're trying to decide, do I take transit to get to where I need to go, or am I going to drive in the general purpose lanes? Technology that helps give them information to make informed decisions. Additionally, another priority that we heard from the City of Charlotte and the Mecklenburg County Commissioners was disadvantaged business or DBE outreach. So for this item, we want to make sure that there's additional outreach to these small businesses prior to construction to make sure that there's awareness of this project. So for a project of this size, we do anticipate several hundred million in DBE funds to be able to implement for this project. So for the City of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County Commissioners, this was something they want to make sure that these small businesses are aware of the opportunities. Next, we're going to walk through the high financial impact priorities. So you'll see here that they are listed out. The pictures that you see to the right, that just shows what the document looked like that we shared with you on June 2nd. This is also posted on our project page if anyone from the public would like to look at it. So for the high financial impacts, we'll go into toll rate caps, expansion-based facility triggers, requirements for technology enhancements, HOV3, large commercial vehicles, and then discounts for eligible groups. All right, so first we'll start with the toll policy. Over the last couple of years, we have heard loud and clear that the toll rates on I-77 North are too high, and we would like to see toll rate caps being implemented for South. Also, increasing express lane utilization to ensure that you are enhancing both the express lanes and the general purpose lanes. So for this term, Chair Qualls and the entire work group was very interested in this and how this would work. The priorities on toll policy development and the express lanes utilization really guided us in our conversation. I know Mayor Knox, your feedback was helpful as well with your experiences driving to Uptown and, seeing toll rates at certain levels, during off-peak hours as well. So as we look at toll rate caps, as I mentioned earlier, that's not something that's implemented on I-77 North. So that is a difference here. But as it would work is basically there are two levels of express lanes utilization that would be required prior to a developer being able to charge certain rates. So there is more regulation over the toll rates and a flexible pricing system that adapts dynamically to the traffic volumes, corridor performance, and then the evolving community needs. And then looking at I-77 North, there are a few discounts that are currently offered. So vehicles with, say, an NC Quick Pass transponder, HOV3, or 3 people in a registered vehicle, emergency responders, transit, and motorcycles can all ride in the express lanes either at a discounted rate or for free. They're all required by contract, and they are all discounts that we would look to implement on I-77 South. So as part of the working group discussions, Commissioner Altman, a priority for her was ensuring that there are discounts for low-income residents. The term here requires the developer to implement a discount program that is offered on I-77 North, something similar on I-77 South. So the private partner on I-77 North, I-77 Mobility Partners, offers 10 free trips to FNS recipients each month. So the term that you see here is implementing a discount program to provide eligible users with a number of free or discounted trips on the express lanes per month or year. Additionally, so for future corridor demand, you'll see here that we have expansion-based facility triggers. We did hear from the representatives from the northern towns highlighting the importance of long-term planning and adaptability for I-77 South, and constructing additional capacity is needed in the future. So as the approach is outlined here, it allows NCDOT to retain the right to deliver future capacity enhancements based on certain performance metrics without having to compensate the developer, which is not something that we have in the I-77 North contract. And then the last priority type here is vehicle eligibility. So HOV3 plus, we heard that that was a priority as well for I-77 South. So as you all may know, on I-77 North, if you pre-register with NC Quick Pass and you have 3 people in the vehicle, you can ride for free in the express lanes if you declare HOV. So to ensure a consistent user experience from that perspective, that would be something that we would incorporate here. And then last, we'll cover the large commercial vehicle express lane eligibility. So as we look at the high financial impact priorities, only one resulted in a positive financial impact. So if you remember the balance beam slide, it shows that we have $600 million in available funding. So we have to make sure that we're budgeting everything out. So as we're looking at these different discounts, we're looking at toll rate caps. We got to make sure that we are balancing that out as it relates to our $600 million in state funding that we can utilize. So as discussed with the working group, to support the high financial impact priorities that were identified, large commercial vehicles would need to have access to the I-77 South express lanes. This would allow the developer to charge these large commercial vehicles a higher rate, which can help also keep lower rates for everyone else, while also being able to incorporate items such as toll rate caps and the discounts. And before I pass it to Brett, I did also want to reiterate the priority that's competition. As mentioned earlier, we took these terms out to the market. We're able to have 22 different meetings with developers. This level of engagement with developers did not happen with I-77 North pre-procurement. So for us, getting feedback from developers as we incorporated these terms with the working group was also important and a priority for the working group as well. But next, I will pass it to Brett to walk through next steps.
Thank you, Carly. So where do we go from here? I've been describing this point where we are in the project development process as actually almost just the starting line. So even though this project's been discussed for going on 2 decades and it's been incorporated into our STIP, and we've talked about it with this group for a number of years now, trying to determine how can we deliver this project, we're really at the starting line of being able to move forward and materially implement this project. So where we stand right now is, since we've initiated, again, as I mentioned earlier, we sent out all the key terms that Carly just covered on June the 2nd. That began a 60-day review window. So all of you should have received that information. It's also going to be on our website, which will be on here on the final slide for your review and comment. And we intend to advertise requests for qualifications in August, hopefully early August. We're still working on that to nail that date down. But that's going to initiate the procurement process. And that's still going to take quite a bit of time, right? So we've invested all this time and energy, but with such a sizable project, it's going to take a while for us to be able to move forward and eventually identify a successful bidder and close in 2027. But between now and then, we'll get statements of qualifications advertised later this year. We're going to continue the project development process. That public meeting I mentioned, that's gonna happen later this year. The public, with the public meeting, we're gonna be tracking what's going on in other states because of the other projects like in Tennessee and Georgia that could have an impact on our schedule. So we're gonna track all those things, but our intent is to reach the RFP phase, request for proposals, early next year. And then by the end of 2027, we'll be at a final RFP phase. So we'll eventually be able to select that final bidder, knowing that we're going to have quite a bit of competition to sift through. We expect some stiff competition, some new concepts, some new ideas for what the project could look like. That's going to take additional coordination with the city of Charlotte as well. And we know that we'll be back in front of this group with updates, and we can talk about what that schedule of updates would look like. So with that, I'm going to close. Again, our website here, the project website, it's got all this information on it that we've covered, that Carly covered in great detail. And of course, as always, you can reach out to either one of us if you have questions in the meantime. Any questions from the group?
Questions, comments for Mayor Hickton?
Thank you for that presentation. Brett, can you speak to how the quality of construction is going to be validated and guaranteed?
So, that's actually part of what NCDOT does with each and every one of our construction contracts. We do have construction standard specifications. We work closely with our design teams on traditional delivered projects, design build included. And anything that gets built is going to have to pass that test. And there's oftentimes in design there's not always a simple answer, and there may not be an exact fit somewhere. So engineering judgment does apply, but certainly we vet all of our designs through our expertise in NCDOT with our various design units. So, and then of course the construction, inspection, quality assurance, all that's going to be part of the work.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, comments?
Yep.
For Brett, Mayor Knox?
Brett, and this has been front of house for a while with us that sat on the committee, but also with this larger board. I would just ask that the reporting back is I don't want this to fall off the radar until we're at the RFP process or something like that. I'd like to see a report back once we've done qualifications, so we can see of these 22 conversations you've had, how many qualifiers are still in the game.
Absolutely.
Is that fair enough?
Yes, sir.
Great question. Councilmember Driggs?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this was a lot to take in, especially for those of you who were not members of the working group. And I want to remind you who those members were, for one thing, just so we're clear about that. It was Dante Anderson, our Mayor Pro Tem, myself, Lisa Qualls, Brad Richardson, Mr. Murray, Mr. Dalton, Ms. Stinson, Mr. Knox, Mr. Travis, Mr. Rosenberg, and Mr. Walsh, and Ms. Altman. So that was the group. The working group took on board all of the issues that were raised by members of this larger body in terms of our deliberations about what the requirements should be. And the task we had set ourselves was to try to ensure that all of the interests are represented and protected in the final work of NCDOT. I think it was a very constructive process. We had some long meetings. We went into a lot of issues in depth. You've just seen a kind of rapid synopsis of how NCDOT organized the things that we had spoken about, the concerns that we had, and then step by step methodically address them. I can also tell you the world has changed since I-77 North, and it's critical to know that because at that time it was kind of a novel structure. And there were 4 companies that indicated some interest, and then in the end, 3 of them didn't. And you ended up with 1 effective bidder. The world is different now, we're told. There's a lot more interest. There's a bigger community of companies that are willing to bid. So I think that we can rely on a genuinely competitive process, which was one concern. You all know that a big issue for many of us was the subject of I-77 North not having cars in the express lanes while the free lanes remained crowded. And that's why in this discussion that you just heard, the question of the cap was put in, like not just a floor on pricing, but also a cap on pricing. And the goal in all the work that we did was to achieve an outcome where you've got healthy utilization in those managed lanes, providing some real relief in the free lanes, and not just a revenue maximizing situation, as I believe we've seen in I-77 North with less than ideal results. You also heard of a bunch of other issues related to kind of low-income users. Again, you could go back through all the topics that came up. So I just wanted to tell you the work of the working group is complete. I think we reached a point, and any other member, please tell me if, no, I think we finished our process and we reached a point where we were satisfied that the time had come to tell the full board about the outcome of our efforts. And you've just seen that in kind of a high-flying, rapid-fire fashion. I mean, having been through the working group process, I don't envy anybody that tried to keep up with everything we were just told. It's a lot. But that's why we now have 60 days. So we have started a clock running, a 60-day clock in which this body can look at the work that's been done and the proposal, the parameters that have been established for the RFQ process, and respond. So if any member here sees anything when you have more time to read it and consider it, and I think materials have been circulated to everybody, but if you have issues, you will have the opportunity to communicate those. And I have suggested that at our July meeting, we will report to the full board on what feedback there was and give this body an opportunity to talk about any input from people who weren't members of the working group. So I think we're ready. I hope we're ready to make this next step. But you should understand from what we were told, the intention is that we will have that 60-day period. At the end of that period, when the 60 days is up, the RFQ will go out. So it's critical that if you do have any issues with the work that has been done and the recommendations of the working group, that you make them known in this time frame. That's your opportunity to kind of participate in the final result. And then the goal was explained to us in August. The 60 days expires and the RFQs go out. So I think that's all I wanted to say. I'm available, as well as obviously any other member of the working group and NCDOT, for people who have questions about how some of these issues were worked out and the solution we're proposing. But I do believe personally that what we have right now is a very robust structure, framework, that has been vetted also with potential bidders. So we're not going to launch this out there and then have it fall flat. I think we've had the benefit of feedback from potential bidders about how certain issues would work out. I had a concern, for example, that when we put constraints on pricing in order to achieve more balanced traffic, that might cramp their financial modeling. And apparently this is not the case. So they've been told about that need, that requirement that we have, and they still want to talk. So that's where we are. Madam Chair, thank you. I just thought it'd be good to kind of clarify a little bit.
You did a fabulous job of being the spokesperson for the group. And it's almost like the book report, right?
I do have a
Very-
question. I apologize. I have not read all that information yet. I will. But when we talk about a cap, was a dollar amount discussed? And if not, I'm sure that's gonna have to be part of the contract, right? Or you're gonna have to say it can be no more than X, and I wonder what that X is, because you know, if you
Yeah.
cap it at $50, that's probably not so great.
We will not be setting that cap, right? That's going to be part of the competitive bid process.
They will set it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Some of the toll cap modeling that the staff brought to us really spelled out a lot of different triggers, but certainly that was it was a large part of a several hour meeting, was making sure that we're protecting that toll cap at some point. Other questions?
So question, how do you deal with cost overruns, on projects like this, where a developer comes up and says, I can't meet those pricing goals and I can't meet that cap? And so now it becomes, it's not viable, or it's not price worthy of people coming into those lanes, if you know what I'm trying to say here. And the developer, it just mushrooms, and now developer says, I can't do that.
So that is not an anticipated outcome of this process, because we had very open conversations with all the developers, those teams, and they understand what's put in front of them, and they're all still very interested in the project. And really the main point of feedback we got, if it's a level playing field and they're all competing for the same points of the contract and same requirements, then the financial model should work out, right? So it's all going to come down to, improving that utilization and getting more cars in the express lane. Some of the priorities that we've talked about, that's another way to go about it. And that's how we're structuring this contract. So we believe it's going to be a success.
Okay.
Mr. Helms?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Britt, I've got a question regarding vehicle eligibility. So from the presentation, what we're going to do is we're going to charge a premium toll rate for large commercial vehicles. So have we defined what we classify as a large commercial vehicle? Is it based off of weight? Is it based off of size? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, it is based off of size, so 18 wheelers would be included in that classification. And it would be a toll rate multiplier that would, it would be higher during the highest peak volumes during the day as well.
Okay, so we're talking about 18 wheelers. We're not talking about box trucks or.
Sure, it could include box trucks as well.
Okay, so we're still working that out then, or has that been completely defined?
Yeah, I mean, it's at least up to and including 18 wheelers. So those classifications in between, a passenger vehicle and that would be included as eligible vehicles.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Osborne?
Yeah, so good job to the working group. It looks like you did excellent work. Thank you for doing that. I do still have concerns about the caps and it just kind of being open-ended as kind of a question or a qualification first for the RFQ process, because we have to say yes or no, we're willing to go forward before we even know what that is. And I just wonder if our engineers, if DOT engineers could recommend, at what level that these caps exist, would we actually see true congestion relief, et cetera, and then put at least a max threshold into the RFQ, like, can you meet this worst case scenario? And they're free to bid against it and do better than that. But for many of these measures that were put into place without some kind of benchmark, my concern is, yeah, we'll ask and they'll say, yeah, we can do it. But will the numbers that they provide really make any difference? And then by then it'll be too late, because we will have already entered into the RFQ.
Brett, you want to address that?
So that was pretty expansive statement, partial question, but I mean, I would respond in this way. So keep in mind, we're talking about a managed lane corridor, right? So the goal is to be able to provide that reliable travel time. So in order to do that, you're going to have to keep the express lanes flowing. So the rates that are charged are going to be commensurate with the volume of traffic that are getting into the lanes, more so than we see on I-77 North. That's why we're talking about structuring it this way. So ultimately, there could come a point in time when those lanes are overflowing with traffic, and then the reliable travel time and minimum speed requirements are compromised, And so the developer would then, they would have to raise the rates, which would reduce the number of vehicles working their way into the lanes. But, you know, in that scenario, there's no incentive for them to do it under our regime. There's reduced incentive. And so the goal here is to let these developers work their way into that, right? You know, certainly we can look at the rates that would be proposed for reasonableness and run it through our models. But at the end of the day, it's the volume of traffic that's trying to get in those lanes that will ultimately control it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think, you know, then the overlying concern is the same, that the purpose is not to create congestion relief, it's to create predictable travel times, which is similar to what we have in the north. And, you know, again, we are in a huge bind again in the north. I know that the state has, you know, we've made other changes in this too, which I really appreciate. It's very well thought out, that will allow the state to make, you know, potential future changes or additional lanes, et cetera. I just hate to see us spend $3.2 billion and not have done anything to address congestion. Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Okay. So again, the last slide, as we've got up here, has the contact information for additional questions as we come into the July meeting and up toward that August date, to offer any feedback, questions, comments, and all that. I know, Brett, you had announced Felix as the new Division 10 engineer, but failed to say that you've got a promotion. So we want to make sure everybody understands why Felix was introduced and that Brett now has a promotion. Tell us your new title and what you'll be doing.
Yep. So now was promoted to the Western Deputy Chief Engineer position for NCDOT, but will certainly still be involved with the I-77 project in that corridor.
Brett, congratulations. Well deserved.
Thank you, sir. Thank
Okay.
you all.
Super. We appreciate that. So we'll move on to agenda item number 7, our 2055 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. And we're going to have Neil Burke, Allison Flewitt from Kimberly Horn, and Kelly Goforth with CATS. So Neil, take us away.
Thank you, Chair Qualls. So overview of what's on our agenda tonight. We are requesting action from the CRTPO board to consider opening a public comment period on the draft fiscally constrained project list. If approved, that period would start tomorrow, June 19th, and conclude on July 19th. And the subject of that public comment period would be the draft fiscally constrained project list, which contains roadway projects as well as transit projects. And Allison Flewitt from Kimberly Horn will provide an overview of the process to develop the roadway project portion of the fiscally constrained project list. And Kelly Goforth of CATS will provide an overview of the process to develop the transit portion of the project list. And then I'll provide a brief summary of how we're going to engage with residents throughout the planning area throughout the next month. And we'll close with that action requested again. A brief overview of the schedule of where we're at. We began the planning process for the 2055 MTP in the spring of last year. So since that time, we have completed the land use scenario planning effort at the start of the project submission phase. We've completed the revenue forecast for the transit and the roadway projects. We have identified the congested corridors as part of the congestion management process. We'll be working with your TCC members to identify strategies for those congested corridors throughout the next month. And we have a draft roadway project list, which is really the outcome of the project evaluation process. So the next step in this process is to conduct public involvement on that draft project list. We have a third phase of public engagement that's focused around the draft report. That'll happen later on this calendar year. That's really a culmination of all of the planning efforts undertaken for the 2055 MTP throughout the last year and a half. And we're working towards a CRTPO board adoption date of the 2055 MTP in March of 2026. And that is a federally required deadline for the board to adopt this plan at that time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Allison Flewitt with Kimley Horn, and she'll provide you an overview of the fiscally constrained roadway project development process.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you all for the opportunity to provide this update for our draft fiscally constrained roadway projects. So this is our opportunity to just refresh you on some of the things that we've had a chance to talk about previously. As you all know, we did have the opportunity to reach out to the jurisdictions within the region to solicit projects for consideration within the MTP. That project submission window ran from January 13th of this year through mid-February. From there, we went into our project evaluation process, which I'll talk about a little bit more, and we've actually gone through that draft fiscal constraint determination as well. Just talking a little bit more detail about that schedule, as we went into our prioritization process, that began with our Tier 2 evaluation in March. We actually established a project cutoff whereby we evaluated a subset of those projects to go into our second tier of prioritization evaluation. Once we had done that, we were able to work with our roadway ranking review committee, which I'll talk about their role here in just a second, and ultimately attain that fiscal constraint determination for our draft project list in May and early June. And that's where we find ourselves today. We presented this earlier this month to the TCC, coming to you all today with the ultimate goal to recommend that draft project list going to our public comment period beginning tomorrow. So the process to date did heavily rely upon our roadway ranking review committee and their participation, which included everything from where we began with our project submissions. We took all of those, just made sure we had the appropriate details from our submitters, went through that Tier 1, Tier 2 evaluation process, a project cost estimation process, and then ultimately arriving at that fiscal constraint determination. But I want to give you a little bit more information about the Roadway Ranking Review Committee because their participation was truly critical to this process. We worked with them hand in hand throughout the prioritization process all the way into our determination of draft fiscal constraint. And you can see this began in mid-March, where we looked at our project submissions, what we had received from all of our jurisdictions, and began that Tier 1 scoring process. That progressed, you see, into April and May, where we really got our hands dirty working with them with our Tier 2 prioritization process, and then culminated in the end of May with the determination of that draft fiscal constraint project list. So a little bit more about why we pulled in the Roadway Ranking Review Committee. We were really looking for partners in this process to help us with consistency and efficiency in the project scoring process, as well as geographic representation across our region for local familiarity with those projects. We have a quantitative and qualitative process when we talk about how we're actually prioritizing these projects. So we're getting some quantitative data, which is very helpful. We wanted to have some oversight, make sure that folks were asking the right questions about how that was being applied. But also we have a lot of qualitative data that's coming in, and that's where we really challenged our Roadway Ranking Review Committee members to help us determine what those scores should be. So they truly went project by project with us to help us assess each one of those projects that progressed through the Tier 2 prioritization process. And then finally, another important role that they played was coordination. Coordinating back with member jurisdictions to address any project-specific questions. If we needed more detail, we wanted to get a little bit more information to help make sure that we were assessing those projects correctly. I mentioned the jurisdictional representation, kind of that geographic breadth, but just to give you a little bit more sense of that, our Roadway Ranking Review Committee members did come from across the region. We had a variety of jurisdictional representatives, as well as a Metrolina regional model representative with Martin helping us with all of our quantitative questions that we had throughout this process. We had NCDOT assisting us through this as well, and of course, CRTPO. So just to give you a little bit more information about some of the steps that we took to get to that draft fiscal constraint.
we started with this roadway project submission process where we had a total of 216 projects submitted. And you can see here on the little table that we had those divided into our STI categories. And we maintain this split throughout everything that we do kind of going forward. This is important for us because if you recall back to when we talked about our roadway revenues, we assess everything in those same 5 categories as well. Really important for us to understand all of those since we're getting funding for those statewide category projects, which are more of our interstates and most significant U.S. routes, our regional level projects, which are our other U.S. routes and major NCs, and then our division level projects, which is essentially everything else. So we want to make sure that our projects are classified into that, and then we can ultimately match them up with the corresponding revenues as well. So I mentioned the roadway prioritization methodology. You all are certainly familiar with this by this point, but we did have these tier 2 and tier 1 criteria. We start with all of those 216 projects that I mentioned going through our tier 1 process, which is essentially that screening that's really much more quantitatively based, focusing on things like congestion, safety, and accessibility to employment. From there, we looked at a subset of those projects, established a cutoff. What do we reasonably think might be able to contend for the available revenues that we had within each of our geographic categories? We took that cutoff of projects and progressed them into our tier 2 criteria. There you see a blend of qualitative and quantitative prioritization criteria, ranging from environmental justice to natural and historic resources, community resources, equitable access, connectivity, and benefit cost. Something that I'll also note that I think is important as CRTPO has developed this prioritization process over the years is that there is a very close correspondence to the criteria that you see here and what NCDOT is also considering as they go through their SPOT STI evaluation process. And that's really important for us because ultimately all of these projects are ultimately going to be evaluated through that mechanism to be considered to move forward into near-term funding consideration. So for us, our path to fiscal constraint began with those roadway projects coming from the jurisdictions. We go through the scoring, and then now that we have our roadway revenues already established, we're comparing our prioritized projects to the available roadway financial projections, and then developing that draft fiscally constrained list, essentially programming those prioritized projects within each of our horizon years until the projected funds are expended. Just a little bit of a reminder about our horizon years. I know we've mentioned them to y'all before. We actually have 4 horizon years for this: 2025, 2035, 2045, and 2055. So we'll talk a little bit more about what all those mean here in just a moment. But before we get there, I wanted to also mention a little bit more detail about our cost estimation process, because this is something that we spent a lot of time on. We're very intentional with what this looked like for the purposes of the MTP. We know that these are planning level cost estimates. For some of our projects, we don't have any more detail than maybe the number of lanes that it might be and some very basic information to and from and our length. That's okay. Some of these are very conceptual in nature. However, we want to be sure that we're doing the best that we can to have a cost estimate that's going to stand the test of time and be representative going forward. So we did perform cost estimates for all of the projects that we received. So all 216 that you saw got a corresponding cost estimate. They also have, it's not just construction cost, right-of-way is baked in. We need all those project phases accounted for in our project cost. And then what we needed to think about was we did kind of that initial planning cost using information that we received from NCDOT at kind of that high level. We then did a quality control. We actually then doubled back with NCDOT to understand, hey, are there some newer pieces of information that we could get from recently obligated projects, projects that have been recently completed, that are similar in terms of cross sections or characteristics that we could compare against some of the projects that we have here. And there may need to be some adjustments made. One of the reasons we did this is we know that cost estimates have been rapidly changing over recent years. And so we wanted to be sure we were hitting the mark in terms of our cost estimates. The outcome of that was, for many of our project types, we did have to make an adjustment and in many cases increase our planning cost estimation amounts. And that resulted in our updated cost estimations that were developed for all of our projects. So that fiscal constraint project list I mentioned essentially goes into the comparison of our prioritized project list to those adopted revenues and then assigning those projects to the available horizon years that I mentioned. And let's talk about some of the details and how we actually did this. And this is where you can see some of that impact of our roadway ranking review committee. We really focused on our final 2 horizon years, 2045 and 2055. Why is that? The reason for that is that 2025 and 2035 horizon years are fully captured with the years from the TIP, our Transportation Improvement Program. So we want to faithfully represent anything that is captured within the TIP and say we want to carry that forward. Those have already been identified as high priority. Those funding streams have been obligated. So we represent that just as it is through 2035. So we're looking beyond that for the activities that we're doing with the Roadway Ranking Review Committee. For any of our projects that are not able to be funded by 2055, they are going to be captured within the planning process in an unfunded vision. So those projects still have the opportunity to be documented within this planning process. We did have efforts to fund as many projects as possible with our available revenue. So an example that I would want to give here is we're going through our prioritization and trying to advance things in priority order within a particular funding category. We might get to a project that's very expensive in our priority list and cannot be funded within, let's say, our 2045 horizon year. Well, rather than just stopping there, what we might want to do is look for the project directly underneath that. If it's a lower cost project, let's consider funding that one in 2045, and then we can move that higher cost project to our next horizon year, to 2055. What that enables us to do is fund more projects sooner. And we know just generally, everything is as cheap right now as it's ever going to be. It only gets more expensive as you go forward. And so that was kind of our general rule of thumb. Inflation, everything has to be referred to in year of expenditure when we talk revenues, when we talk about costs. For our revenues, y'all may recall that we actually looked at a 2% growth rate for our revenues for roadway projects. We actually used a 4% inflation rate for our project costs. Again, that's an acknowledgement that in general, our project costs are inflating at a rate that is greater than what we see our revenues increasing. And then finally, we had some of our project submitters submit more than one alternative for our particular project. So an example might be that someone submitted an intersection version of a project and an interchange version of a project. In that case, we prioritize both versions. And then we financially constrained whichever one of those scored the best. We just did that as a consistent rule so that we had an even approach across all of the different geographies and project types. So I want to quickly run through the 5 different geographies, and then we'll kind of sum this up. So starting at the statewide level, I just want to orient everybody to what you're seeing because all of these are set up in the exact same way. What I'm showing here are specifically our 2 horizon years that we, as a roadway ranking review committee, went through the fiscal constraint determination exercise. So again, for anything that we're considering existing plus committed, those things within the TIP going up to 2035, we're just carrying those forward exactly as they are. So you'll see the total number of projects for each one of those horizon years. And you'll see the amount of funds that were actually programmed against those projects. So those are the costs of those projects that are included there. We have those further broken up by the intersections and interchanges, and then the corridors. So those are just the project types within each one. I'll note that this is one of the most significant changes in this version of your MTP compared to what y'all did the last time. We did not have intersections and interchanges as part of our project type selection the last time. So this is a new attribute. We did see very healthy participation from our jurisdictions in identifying those project types and also in carrying them forward into the fiscally constrained portion of our plan. And then finally, in the final row, you'll also note the unfunded vision portion for each one of our geographies. So it's helpful to just note this as a comparison where we had kind of the total number of projects and then breaking those out by horizon years. So starting with statewide, we have 11 projects that are funded within our 2045 horizon year, 7 of which are intersection interchanges and 4 are corridors. 7 in our 2055 horizon year. I think a general trend that you'll see across all of these is that we have fewer projects constrained in our second horizon year than we have in our first. Again, if you think about the fact that our costs are inflating at a higher rate than our revenues, it's fairly intuitive that in general, we're going to be able to fund less in our farther out horizon year than we would anticipate being able to fund a little bit closer in. So just something to observe as we continue forward. Moving forward to Region E, we have 13 projects funded in the 2045 horizon year, and then 7 projects in our 2055 horizon year, with an additional 16 projects that are unfunded. Something else I neglected to mention on the previous slide, but I do want to point out here, is the second bullet on each one of these shows the dollar amount of remaining funds for each one of these. The thing you should be looking for there is that that is not a negative number. So we need to be financially constrained. That just means there needs to be some amount of money left over. I guess it could equal 0 if we were just doing amazingly great and our costs magically equaled our revenues. But we definitely need to make sure that we have that positive balance in revenues at the end of the day. So you will note that all of these are financially constrained across all of our geographies. For Region F, we have fewer projects included here. For those of y'all that are keeping track of the revenues that are available, there is also significantly less revenue available for our portion of Region F that is here within the CRTPO region. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind as you look at that comparison. So 2 projects within the 2045 horizon year and an additional project by 2055. Moving to Division 10, we had the highest total number of projects here with 20 projects by 2045, an additional 9 projects by 2055, but you will see there are 67 remaining unfunded vision projects in Division 10. And then finally, in Division 12, again, a smaller funding amount for the CRTPO area relative to the remainder of Division 12. We have 2 projects by 2045, an additional project by 2055, and then 10 unfunded vision projects. So let's kind of look at that in its totality, and we'll bring back those projects that you see in the green row up there, which are existing plus committed projects. So those are the projects that you have in your TIP. So we have 93 projects that are essentially taking us through 2035. An additional new 73 projects that are in our fiscally constrained portion of our plan. That takes us from 2036 to 2055. And then beyond the years of our fiscally constrained plan, we have an additional 123 roadway projects. So I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions.
Questions so far for Allison? Commissioner Almond?
Yes, thank you. In the future, might it be possible to put page numbers on the presentation so that I could note what page I needed you to navigate back to? And my understanding is you work for CATS, is that what I heard you say?
I work for Kimley Horn and Associates. So we're the
Okay.
consultant working for CRTPO and the
Okay.
preparation of the MTP.
Okay. So, one question I have is, do all these projects require that the submitter have a local match? Like, do you get to submit a project for consideration if you don't bring money to the table as the submitter?
These are capital projects that we anticipate getting from NCDOT's prioritization process. So the majority of these projects do not require a local match. There is a local contribution option, but very few project submitters take advantage of that. Commissioner Altman, you may be thinking of our annual discretionary process where that's the federal funding we receive directly to our planning area, and those projects do require a local match.
Okay, because if you can bring up the review committee members, I know that with perhaps what you just referred to, there's a subcommittee that has Mecklenburg County representation on it. But I don't think there's any Mecklenburg County representation here. And if it requires that we bring money to the table, we don't have a budget for roads, then I would understand us not having representation. But we do have roads in the ETJ that need assistance, and perhaps they're not eligible. I don't know, but I'm just concerned that there doesn't appear to be a voice for Mecklenburg County in the development of the recommended projects. And so can you speak to that?
Sure. So this is a subcommittee that really walked each project through that two-tiered funnel ranking process. So we tried to, make it a smaller group so it's not the entirety of the technical coordinating committee. I will say that all technical coordinating committee members had an opportunity to submit roadway projects. And we provided a workshop after the January TCC meeting to educate TCC members on how to submit projects. This was a regular agenda item during our meetings. We sent out a lot of different emails. And I'll just say editorially, Mecklenburg County hasn't traditionally submitted roadway projects through this process or through our NCDOT prioritization process to develop the STIP.
Who would be the best person for me to talk to offline? Because I don't want to take everybody's time up with this unique problem maybe I have to understand it. I just want to, we might not have done it historically. I want to confirm it's appropriate if we're not doing it. And this is too complicated for me to kind of dive in here. Who would be the best person for me to take my manager and have that conversation with?
Start with me.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
The questions, comments? If you'll allow me, Allison, you mentioned, and maybe I misunderstood you as you were talking through the cost evaluations, that some of these projects came in with very little information as far as might just be, not that much data. Did I understand that correctly?
That's correct. Some projects that are being identified, again, these are, I would say, for the MTP process, they may be coming from other local plans. They may be coming from the CTP. In fact, I will just say maybe as a sidebar that one of the requirements, in fact, of projects that were progressing into the roadway project submission process is that they had to be at least a part of the CTP at the regional level. But that doesn't provide us much beyond kind of the basic elements of what might be included. So we may have some basic cross-sectional details, extents, length, number of lanes. There may be some information on multimodal characteristics. Others may have quite a bit more information, such as specific intersections that may need to be improved. Obviously, our intersection and interchange specific projects may have characteristics that they're looking for, but there is a degree of variability depending on where the project came from, and I guess whether there's been prior study conducted for that or not.
So then can you roll back to the kind of beginning of your presentation that talked about the scoring, kind of getting through the bucket, safety? There you go. So if you have very little information, then how do you give it scoring points on congestion, safety, and access to employment if it's just coming from a plan?
Yeah, good question. So, and Neil, feel free to jump in on this as well. So a lot of what we're talking about here is if we do understand, let's just talk about a basic capacity expansion project. We understand the location of the project. We're then able to place that into our regional travel demand model, understand what the current congestion concerns are in that area, and understand, okay, if we're expanding the facility in this location, we do anticipate it to alleviate congestion in this way. And the model is able to tell us that information. Similarly to things like safety, that's more of a determination of existing safety concerns on that facility. And then there would be an expectation that as that project progresses into feasibility studies and design, that they will be looking again at what those safety concerns are and addressing some of those as the project continues to evolve and develop. Neil, do you want to add in?
I'll add to that we have enough information that we receive from the TCC members when they submit projects, coupled with the Tier 1 criteria, which we get data from NCDOT and the regional travel demand model. Tier 2, again, it's a lot of data that's widely available for any project type throughout our planning area. So what I'm trying to say is that we're able to evaluate all the projects on an equal playing ground, no matter if they have a little bit of planning and engineering or a lot, and they're all scored a similar way, similar with the cost estimate process. Even if a project has a cost estimate, we take that project through a uniform cost estimate project. So we're really treating any project, whether it is just we just have the extents within the CTP, or we have a feasibility study, pretty confident that we're, utilizing that same uniform process in the cost estimation and the evaluation.
Thank you for that. I still feel like it was probably a little bit flawed almost to Commissioner Altman's point of if you don't have a member on that scoring committee and you have very little information, how are you assigning safety and accessibility of employment if you don't have that extra voice? So just a statement, not necessarily a question, but.
And I do want to add on to, I appreciate that point, because I think one thing I neglected to mention as we talked about the information we received from our providers is when we had the roadway project submission workshop, there were a series of questions that we asked each of our submitters to provide us answers to. So despite some of these projects maybe not having as much information when they originally began, there was information that we were asking that was particularly directed toward these prioritization pieces of information that did kind of assist us in making sure that, as Neil mentioned, that we were going to arriving at that level playing field. So I apologize for not clarifying that information. I think I oversimplified it when I mentioned it in the cost estimation process, but we did very intentionally start with those jurisdictional submitters, asking them for that information so that we could make more informed decisions as we got to that process.
Right. Thank you. Other questions? Lee, did you have anything else?
Thank you. I'm good for now.
Good. Anybody else? Okay. Hearing none, it sounds like your request is to, Councilmember Driggs, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's all right. Could you go back to the slide that showed that one? Thank you. So I'm trying to reconcile this process with what we've heard in terms of constraints on funding and the P8 and the P7 and everything else. New fiscally constrained projects. In the real world, how likely is it that those will all get built? I mean, in the simplest possible terms, aren't we, this is a very robust planning process, but I think there are realities in terms of the funding and so on, and our experience in the last couple of cycles that just make me wonder. So the unfunded projects are in Never Never Land, presumably. I mean, we're not expecting them really to be realized, at least not in any reasonable time frame. At my age, a reasonable time frame is actually pretty short. But the new fiscally constrained projects. So these are projects that had not been submitted before. Is that right? They've been added to our MTP. And Neil, you and I were talking a little bit about this, but those are projects that were not on our MTP before. Is that right?
It's a combination of things, and I'll back up and talk about the funding issue first. The last several years, NCDOT has had a cash flow problem that's not necessarily reflected in a long-range plan. We will continue to receive our allotment of state and federal funds. So this plan is showing us that through the fiscal constraint process, that there are adequate revenues to deliver projects like this. And one of the nice things about this process is every 4 years, we do the process over again to make sure that we're utilizing the most recent cost estimates, the most recent information about the projects. So to answer your next question, some of the new fiscally constrained projects are kind of a mixture. They're legacy projects that may have been committed in the TIP at one time that have fallen out for the TIP to meet its fiscal constraint requirements. And we've had those member jurisdictions bring those projects back through the project evaluation process. Or it's completely new projects that maybe have become a recent priority to our jurisdictions that we're asking them to submit. So it's really kind of a combination.
So I just think for a kind of lay person who's wondering what road projects can I hope for, I look at this and I'm unsure, right? I just sort of think, okay, we've got a plan. It's fiscally constrained, but they have a cash flow problem. And I don't mean in any way to criticize the planning process. I'm just saying I have a real world apprehension that these things are not going to come true. And if we can't rely on this as a guidepost for realizable, practically realizable projects, then what reference do I have?
One other benefit of an MTP in the long-range planning process is it provides us with a reliable pool of projects that we can submit to NCDOT in a given round of prioritization. And we've used this project ranking process. This is the 5th cycle that we're using it. And generally, a project that scores well within our MTP will score competitively within a given round of NCDOT's prioritization process. So in my opinion, it's healthy to have a big list of fiscally constrained projects to pull from throughout our planning area, because we have to work with NCDOT to develop the STIP through the prioritization process every 2 years.
And I don't mean to question that or the work that you're doing. I'm just saying that we know what sort of issues there are, cash flow constraints, whatever. And so I guess I would just suggest that people not place very large bets on the realization of the 73 projects. But thank you, appreciate that.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
can I address?
Mr. Rosenberg, please.
I think one of the issues looking back with DOT is that we realized that our cost estimates were incorrect with the amount of inflation. We're really working hard going forward to do more current and frankly better cost estimates. So I think our ability to project what we will be able to build is going to be dramatically better than what it's been. The other thing, and it's a reality we've talked about here, we need more money for roads.
Yeah.
We have to solve that problem as to what the legislature wants to give us. So I think that's where you can make input as a group into your legislative representatives.
We have heard from leadership of the legislature an enumeration of possibilities they've considered and all the reasons why none of them work. So they're in a difficult position. I get that. But again, I'm just trying to be a little practical here and note that we have a challenge in terms of being able to achieve this plan. But thank you.
Other questions, comments? Okay.
Yes, Madam Chair. I mean, relative to Councilman Driggs' point, I would love to be reminded, if it could be presented at a future meeting, what the leadership in the House and the Senate and the governor's office has said in the last 6 months or year about how they intend to address this, because I really don't know. And you're referencing that they have rejected all the things in the offing, but I just would like to have clarity, or maybe someone can give that to me right now. What sort of responsible positions our leaders are taking relative to this problem, or are they just radio silence? I don't know.
Councilmember Driggs?
I would note, and Mr. Rosenberg, correct me, but the legislature did move $600 million into transportation from their general fund as an interim measure to try to address the discrepancies. But the possibilities that were suggested, I'm going back a year or two, but at an alliance meeting, for example, looking at EVs, road miles, and various other things reflecting the change in consumption of gas and trying to align the burden of the tax with the utilization of the roads. But then there are unintended consequences. And that's why when they looked at each of these things, they thought, well, that's not fair to this person, or that doesn't work, or that doesn't create enough money. So I agree with you. I think it would be interesting to know the latest thinking about how we can close the gap, because the 600 million was non-recurring, and compared to the magnitude of the problem, in spite of their best intentions, I appreciated it, but it's still there's still a big unanswered question.
Yes, or maybe not put anyone on the hot seat here.
He's going to give us an update soon.
Okay.
Stay tuned.
I'm debating in my head whether to say it now or wait for my update.
Why don't we, we'll handle this and then we'll let you have a full agenda item slot. How about that?
I'll say it then.
Okay, great. Other questions, comments on this? Okay, great. Then there is action requested for this to approve the release of the 2055 MTP draft.
Move to approve.
Sorry.
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 We do have a
Oh,
whole,
with
another
transit.
component that deals with the transit
Move that.
fiscal constraint project
Sorry.
list. So
We were just moving things along.
I apologize, but
No.
I'd like to introduce Kelly Goforth. She's the deputy director with CATS, and she's going to lead us through a brief explanation of the inclusion of 4 capital fixed guideway transit projects into our MTP fiscally constrained project list. And then I'll close out with a brief overview of what we intend to do with public engagement.
Great, thank you.
Good evening. I'm Kelly Goforth, Chief Development Officer for the Charlotte Area Transit System. And tonight, I'm going to just briefly review the process that CATS undertook to update our transit system plan and develop our fiscally constrained project list. So over the past 8 months, we followed a 3-step process to update the transit system plan. And that plan includes both our Better Bus program as well as our Rapid Transit Corridor System plan. In fall of 2024, we confirmed the goals and objectives, updated our financial model with baseline assumptions for both capital costs, O&M costs, and revenues. Then we developed 4 fiscally constrained scenarios, and those had variations in transit mode and length of projects for our rapid transit corridors. Based on that analysis and public input, we then developed recommendations for an updated transit system plan, and that included an implementation strategy and financial analysis. Throughout this process, we had a very robust public engagement process that included a project-specific website, 26 community and stakeholder meetings, 8 pop-up events to get input from transit riders at our transit centers. We also hosted 6 public meetings with over 125 attendees and a virtual public meeting that had over 480 views. We did outreach to over 150 community organizations and over 75 neighborhood groups. And we had a robust outreach effort to let people know about the process and invite them to get engaged. So we presented our staff recommendations in April, and on May 28th, last month, the Metropolitan Transit Commission adopted the updated transit system plan, along with a fiscally constrained implementation strategy. The transit system plan includes the Better Bus program with improved frequency, expanded bus service, microtransit across the county, as well as bus stop amenities. It also includes a phased implementation of our rapid transit corridors, and that includes the Red Line commuter rail service from Charlotte Gateway Station to Mount Morn, the Silver Line light rail project from the airport to Coliseum Ovens, the Gold Line streetcar extension from Rosa Parks Place to Eastland, the Blue Line extension from I-45 South Boulevard to Carolina Place in Pineville, And we also noted that future extensions of light rail for the Silver Line West to I-45 and east to Matthews and for the Blue Line to Ballantyne would be considered as funding allows, with enhanced bus service to be implemented in the interim. The MTC also directed staff to study and evaluate options to further extend light rail for the Silver Line East, including other funding opportunities. So we're requesting that the rail projects be included in the fiscally constrained metropolitan transportation plan. This will allow our projects to be eligible for federal funding and to advance in the federal project development process, including the environmental process. The transit projects have to be included both in the MTP as well as in the regional air quality emissions analysis. The financial analysis that we undertook was based on the best available information for all of the projects. They're all in early stages of design, so they include significant contingency levels. We worked with our financial consultant to ensure our cost estimates and our revenue projections are based on reasonable and conservative assumptions. On the revenue side, the federal guidance requires that the funding must be reasonably anticipated to be available within the time period. The analysis assumed Federal Transit Administration funding through the Capital Investment Grant Program, which we have received in the past for both the Blue Line and the Blue Line Extension projects. And for the rail projects in Mecklenburg County, the local funding match would be the proposed 1 cent sales tax for mobility, of which 60% would be dedicated for transit. And of course, this proposed legislation has been introduced in both the House and the Senate and is progressing currently through the House. And then for the portion of the red line within Iredell County, the financial analysis assumes a future local funding match with the source to be determined. So based on the updated transit system plan, this is the list of fiscally constrained projects, the estimated project cost, and the proposed horizon ban. We'll be working, of course, to expedite these projects and implement them as soon as possible with available funding. Some of the projects may be able to be implemented earlier in that horizon ban or some portion of it. So I just wanted to note that as well. And as we study the projects further, we would anticipate any changes to those project limits or to the project schedule would be included in a future update to the MTP or an amendment to the MTP if necessary. So that is the conclusion of this portion of the presentation. Be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thanks, Allison. Commissioner Helms?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you can go back to the, let's see, I think it was a couple slides back for revenues. Oh, there you go. Okay. So my question is, I've been hearing some mixed things regarding the bill that's been introduced at the North Carolina General Assembly regarding the sales tax there in Mecklenburg. How confident do you feel about that being passed by the legislature?
My understanding is the bill is making progress in the General Assembly right now in the North Carolina House. And so I think we are optimistic about the potential approval of the legislation.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, comments? Nothing else for Kelly?
Thank
Okay.
you.
Neil, you want to lead us
Yep.
to ask?
Quickly wrapping up here. Closing out with public engagement. So there are 3 phases of public engagement as part of the 2055 MTP. Last summer, we had the first phase, which was focused around the project kickoff and transportation needs. The second phase, which we will hopefully begin tomorrow, is again on the draft fiscally constrained project list, and we're seeking feedback from residents and stakeholders on those projects in the roadway project list as well as the transit project list. And then we'll have that third phase of public engagement anticipated late this fall, maybe into January of next year. That'll really be on the draft plan and the culmination of all the recommendations we've been bringing forth to you all incrementally over the past year. So focusing in a little more on the second phase, it'll highlight what we heard in phase one, which was last summer. It'll showcase the process that we've completed to date, and it'll inform residents how the fiscally constrained project list was identified. Again, public comment period is scheduled to begin, if approved, tomorrow and continue through July 19th. Our activities will be twofold, really focused around digital engagement, interactive mapping, and digital surveys. Those are all on our project website, 2055mtp.org. That's really our portal and our clearinghouse for all of the virtual engagement opportunities. We do have a healthy amount of pop-up events that I'll briefly touch on at the next slide. And then we also have equity focus group meetings with equity groups identified in many of our communities throughout our planning area. And I know you have a lot of paper on your desks this evening, but this pamphlet here kind of lists our scheduled pop-up events. We're going to be at 2 events beginning tomorrow, 2 Juneteenth events. We also have stakeholder events that we're working to schedule to try to get feedback from the economic development community, sustainability and mobility, and moving people and goods. And then the second page here, this is equity focus groups. And if you all could bring this back to your member jurisdictions, we have a QR code. We're trying to get more residents to participate in these equity focus groups. And if anyone scans that with their phone on that pamphlet, they can sign up for those. So here's the list of potential pop-up events. Again, beginning tomorrow, going through the 15th. And we really tried to be deliberate in trying to get events scheduled throughout our 3-county planning area. And this isn't the final list either. If you all have events within your communities and you'd like a CRTPO presence, we can set up a table. We have maps available. We can also conduct presentations to your boards, your planning boards, neighborhood associations, church groups, community groups. We really want to make sure that residents have an opportunity to become informed about this plan and provide their feedback. So that concludes the presentation this evening. Again, the requested action before the board is to open a public comment period on that draft fiscally constrained roadway and transit project list. This was brought before the TCC earlier this month, and they unanimously recommended this action.
Great. Looking for a motion to open the public comment period. Councilmember Driggs has made a motion.
Second.
Second. Okay, we've got several seconds. We'll record that. I think I heard Commissioner Altman second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries. So we'll start that. Now, where's the best place that somebody can find to make the public comment? Where can they find that?
Making public comments virtually, I would advise them to go to our project website, 2055mtp.org, and there is an interactive map that'll be live tomorrow as well as a survey. You can either make comments on the interactive map, or you can make comments within the survey, or you can email us comments.
All right, so the project website?
Yes.
Great. And then if everybody would take a look at the flyer, check out where they're going to be in your community, maybe come show some support for Neil and Bob and the entire staff that will be out there.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Councilmember Knox. or,
Neil-
Mayor Knox.
pushing this out publicly, besides these opportunities, how are people going to find out about this?
We are going to issue a media release tomorrow morning that'll announce that the public comment period's open. It'll also direct residents either to the project website to interact with us virtually. It'll also have that list of pop-up events on there. So again, any way that you all locally can direct residents and stakeholders to our project website, distribute the media release amongst your local media channels, we would appreciate that.
Right. Thank you. All right, moving on to agenda item number 8, staffing and resources study phase 2 update. Rich Dembo. Rich? No. Yeah. Oh,
Rich,
okay.
I just want to do a real quick intro with Rich. For those of you who've been associated with CRTPO for a while, this might look familiar because this is phase 2 of a staffing and resources study we did in 2019. This study is being undertaken as part of the implementation of the strategic plan that called for a second look at our staffing and resources needs. And Rich will get into some of the details about that, about the background when he speaks. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of his background. Rich helped us with the original staffing and resources study. Actually, he was responsible for it as project manager. Same thing with the strategic plan. And he brings a depth of experience with MPOs, having worked with the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations for many years. So really has a good understanding of what the needs are for any MPO throughout the country. And he's continued with that during his tenure with Cambridge Systematics. So I'm really happy that we could get somebody with the background here locally, but also having that national perspective to do this study for us. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rich to conduct the presentation.
Welcome, Rich. We're glad to see you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob, for that intro, and good evening, members of the board. I will go through the slides here and give you a little bit of background. As Bob mentioned, he talked at a high level, but I want to give you a little more detail, but then also tell you what we're doing now with this new study and where we plan to go with this and how we'll engage you all in the future. I think this is a really interesting project. Not all MPOs do this type of work. It's not a federal requirement for MPOs to look internally, but this is really looking at what's going on in this room now and all the work that goes into these discussions. So it's it's a lot more focused inward. The purpose, as Bob mentioned at a high level for this study, is to look at the MPO and make sure it's staffed to meet the requirements, the federal requirements, and exceed those requirements, and also to meet the needs of the members that are members of CRTPO. So as I mentioned, not a lot of MPOs do this. The region's changing, as we just heard in these presentations, and as you all are aware of, it's changing pretty fast. So if the organization doesn't change with it, then you're not going to be able to keep up. So this is really a way to look inward at how the staff can make sure they're doing that. And there have been several new factors since the phase 1 study, which was 2019. A lot of difference in workforce issues now across the country and here in North Carolina. Changes to the federal transportation program, which you're all very aware of. And then a lot of new initiatives that have happened in recent years. So Beyond 77 and the things we just talked about, Connect Beyond, federal grants, and a lot of other things too. So it's really updating the organization based on all these external factors. So real quick overview of the 2019 study. 2019 was when it was completed, but it started about a year before that. And again, this was the first effort that CRTPO undertook to make sure they can meet and exceed the federal requirements. There were a couple of things that gave the impetus to this study. One was a 2015 board directive, the CRTPO board here, to ensure that the staff has everything they need to implement the locally administered projects process. There were some issues with implementing that and carrying it forward. The staff at that time was about 5 staff people, so not nearly as many as you see today. So a directive to look at that. And then as part of the certification review process that MPOs go through every 4 years, in 2016, FHW and AFTA said, please evaluate your staffing needs, make sure you have what you need to do the job. Again, at that time, there were several fewer staff than CRTPO has now. So the culmination of that 2019 study, the activities that were involved in that study were stakeholder engagement, talking to a lot of folks, some here in the room, these agencies, as well as external, a SWOT analysis. So what were your strengths and weaknesses, and how do we perceive those and rank them with the opportunities and threats we're facing? The challenges that we faced as a region for transportation and what staff and decision makers here on the board need to address. Unmet needs, that 4th bullet there, that was actually a byproduct. We didn't scope that in this study, but the study did produce a set of unmet needs that the staff has been building on. And then the outcome were 11 recommendations. As Bob mentioned, one of the recommendations was to do a strategic plan, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So this is just a broad overview of the recommendations that came out of that initial staffing study. They were ranked according to expected impact, the additional resource needs that would be involved, and implementation horizon, sort of a sense from the group that did the study and oversaw the study of what the priority was. I won't go over all of these, but again, the third one from the bottom was to undertake a strategic planning exercise. So in 2021, CRTPO did that. I think some of you in this room were involved in that effort, but that was really to develop a strategic plan to look more specifically at what the organization should be doing. Part of the reason was there was a lot going on in the region that caused a lot of reactive responses, things that might distract us from the day-to-day activities, such as the ones that Neil and Kelly just talked about with putting together the plan, but really a way to focus more strategically on what the staff should be doing on a day-to-day basis, so that when those things came up and came along, they don't lose focus of what's important. That effort resulted in a redefined mission and a vision. So why did we exist? What do we aim to achieve? 6 broad goals of what we want to do to realize the vision, and then 34 strategies underneath those 6 goals. So I won't get into the specifics of what's in there. I think you've all probably been apprised of the strategic plan, and I know staff is monitoring implementation of those 34 goals along the way. So really, I'm getting to where we are now today at this point with the phase 2 staffing study. And our approach to that is very similar to the first one with a little bit of adaptation. So the first is to develop a project steering committee, and I'll get to a slide with the members of those steering committee members in a moment. Undertake some data collection and survey and interview the staff on their daily experiences, what they perceive as needs for the organization, their interactions with the members, and how they run the program. And then challenges and solutions that are out there in the real world, common to all MPOs and common to this and specific to this region as well. And some peer MPOs to look at how they're doing staffing, how they're addressing the challenges they face, and bring some of those good practices here to CRTPO. And then the fourth step is to develop recommendations and strategies similar to the previous exercises. So real quick here in the steering committee, we have the chair and vice chair of the board on the steering committee, the TCC chair and vice chair as well. We have a past CRTPO board chair, Michael Johnson. He was engaged in the previous 2 efforts and can bring a perspective based on that. We have the Charlotte Planning Design and Development Director, NCDOT, the Transportation Planning Division Director, Alpesh Patel. We have Katz, the Chief Transit Planning Officer, who I believe is in the room, CDOT, a strong partner in Central Iowa Regional Council, and then FHWA in their oversight capacity. So the purpose of this steering committee is to have a smaller group that's taking a look at what we're doing along the way, guiding and providing strategic advice to us as we go forth. And then really when we get towards the end with specific recommendations to review and validate those recommendations and findings and help make sure that they are implementable, reasonable, and practical. They're going to meet 3 times. We've had the first meeting in April. We have the second meeting coming up in a little over a week on June 27th. And then we'll have another meeting of the steering committee towards the end in September. With data collection, the staff surveys and interviews, we've got 4 basic steps we're engaging in. And just so you know how this process is unfolding, I'll touch on them real quick. We're looking at what's new here since 2019, what's changed, what's different. We've done the staff survey. We've done interviews with the staff here at CRTPO, as well as 3 former staff members to get input on, as I mentioned, challenges they face, struggles they may be having, the things that they are working with, the skill sets they have, and what they feel may be gaps in what they need to do to deliver the program. And then a staff workshop, which we just had on June 5 to assess and look at what the findings were from all the effort and validate that. We're in this third task now, which is looking at workforce issues across the country for MPOs transportation agencies in general, but MPO specifically. And then the peer MPO research I mentioned. So we've got potential peers identified as Orlando, Austin, Indianapolis, Raleigh, Fort Lauderdale, Sacramento, and Seattle. These would be the MPOs in those regions that are in many ways similar to Charlotte's experience. Charlotte's, the transportation issues being faced in Charlotte. So we're in the process of doing that now. We have the second steering committee, which I mentioned, coming up at the end of the month, and then a third staff workshop to talk about all this. So it's a very collaborative process involving the steering committee and the staff. And then we'll come up with the recommendations at the end. Draft recommendations to review with the steering committee and the staff workshop, and then finalize that based on the input we're getting. So you'll probably see me at a future board meeting as we get further in the progress to talk about some of the findings that we've had so far and how we're progressing through these steps. The expected study outcomes are really to come up with an optimized organizational structure. Early findings are, and this is no surprise based on the previous staffing study and strategic plan, but this organization is doing great as far as a sense of teamwork, getting the work done, getting work done that's relevant, and working with members. So there are ways to optimize what's going on now, and then come up with proposals for a different org structure, which helps the staff do their day-to-day activities and the things that they're want to accomplish, as well as career progression for them as well. Retirements may be coming up in the future, and succession planning is important. So this will help make sure that that process is well thought out and goes forth. And really to clarify some of the roles and responsibilities, there were some areas that clarification has been identified as a need, balance and improve the workload. And then if there is a need for additional staff resources, this will uncover those and work to prioritize those and raise that. So this is the second to last slide, I believe. Based on the work we've done so far, what has come into focus is a need to clarify some of the reporting lines among the staff to avoid some of the ambiguity that may be occurring in roles and decision-making. A few staffing gaps have been identified. They're not major. I've worked with other MPOs where there are major gaps. They're relatively minor here, but how can we address those as an organization going forward? And then, as I mentioned, some career pathways, some clarity in career pathways. So staff have the opportunity to advance, to learn leadership skills and staff management along the way. And probably an outcome will be an enhanced org chart with maybe some more mid and intermediate level roles and positions. So, and then finally, to ensure that, as the work progresses and as new responsibilities arise, the organization can handle those and handle growing responsibilities. So very quickly on the schedule, we started this in February. The yellow dots are staff workshops. The red triangles are the steering committee meetings. We are now here in June in the number 3 there with the peer MPO research. And we'll move after that's completed into the developing recommendations phase. So we're aiming to wrap this up at the beginning of October. And as I mentioned, I'll probably be back here to talk about those findings and get more input.
Right.
So ready to take any questions you may have?
Great. Any questions for Rich, council member? Or I'm sorry, Commissioner Altman?
Fine, thank you. This board doesn't review and approve a budget for the administrative processes of the CRTPO staff, does it? No. Okay. So is that totally under the city of Charlotte? Okay. All right, thank you.
Other questions, comments? Great. We will look forward to seeing you in the future with some more updates.
Thank you
Rich.
very much.
Thanks. Super. Moving on, we're getting there, guys. Everybody hang with us. We got a couple more items. Agenda item 9, this Central Line and Mobility Hub pilot projects. Andy, you're already up there. Look at you.
I've been told to be quick, so I will be quick.
Great, welcome, Andy.
Just want to briefly give you an update. This is a presentation I gave to the TCC, so your staff should be aware of this, but just trying to bring this information to you as well. But I want to talk about an upcoming initiative we have. Many of you were involved with Connect Beyond. One of the recommendations of that was to initiate a regional mobility hub implementation strategy. So that is what we are starting. And this, first of all, at time of Connect Beyond, we identified around 70 potential mobility hub locations. Those are basically the confluence of major arterials and so forth, or transit lines and so. First part is kind of refining this list, kind of fine tune, make sure. And what we'll do is we'll have an analysis of all the different sites to kind of show the feasibility of those locations as a potential mobility hub. So the strategy is to really develop a roadmap for the different communities in the Central Iowa region, as well as the regional MPOs, to help communities kind of get that roadmap of how mobility hubs can be developed and implemented and so forth. So, but what I'm here to talk about tonight is we are, as part of this project, we are funding 4 pilot studies for communities within the Central Iowa region. And I do have a handout for you, which kind of explains what mobility hubs, but bottom line, it's 2 different modes coming together at a location. So it's not, a lot of times people think it's like when a light rail line comes to a bus and so forth. It could be as simple as a place where a bike to a bus or whatever. So I want, think big, don't think this is only for Charlotte. This is for our whole region, 9-county region. And mobility hubs come in a lot of different flavors. I like to say they can look like a lot of different things. And ideally, for these 4 pilots, I would love to have a variety of types, because if we can do some of this work, other communities can see, oh, I get it. This is something we can do as well. So what we'll do, we'll pick those 4 pilot studies. We'll work with them with our consultant to kind of develop a kind of a small scope of what the studies will consist of, but it could be matters of site selection, technical analysis, conceptual design. Each community will also have an implementation roadmap, which kind of says, we've gotten you to here, here are the next steps. And maybe get you far enough that you can go for funding either at the city level or go for outside funding, but just trying to keep the ball moving forward for mobility hubs. So a timeline real quick, we do have a Central Iowa Learns. These are webinars that Central Iowa puts on next Thursday, a week from tomorrow, 11:30 to 1. Talk about kind of what mobility hubs are, give some examples, and part of it would be me going through the application. So we already have about 40 people, a lot of your staff have already signed up for it, but you're also welcome as well. It is free. So I can go to the Central Iowa site. The application period will start right after. So I say July, but it actually probably may start officially open like the day after our Central Iowa Learns. Go through the month of July, and then we'll pick the projects early August, and the work will start hopefully to be completed next March. So all this information is on the handout. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. My info is on there, but we think it's a great opportunity. If you are looking at these already, that'd be great. And in any way we can assist you move that ball forward. So with that, I think that's all I have. And I have any questions, or I can get off stage and move on to the next item.
Questions for Andy? All right, you're gonna give us those flyers, so everybody has that.
Yeah, did you not get one? I did pay. I can bring some around.
See, yeah.
Most of you,
They'll-
hopefully.
Oh, they're coming around, it sounds like. No. No, okay. That's
Do you
right.
need some more?
We'll get some more. Yeah,
Okay.
that's super. Thank you for the update. We'll look forward to hearing about those new, the 4 that you choose for a pilot.
Okay, thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Andy. Yes, oh, yes, Commissioner Altman.
Thank you. What budget do you have? Like, what are the resources for the entities that will be applying to be awarded under the pilot program? Like, there's a pilot program coming, but how does it get funded? How much money is available?
We are funded by a federal transportation grant, so that's where the funding will be. It's part of our overall contract to do the strategy. But the consultants who are doing that will also be working on the pilot studies. So there's no match requirement for the communities. It's really what we're looking for is staff that is going to be involved and has a stake in it. But we're not asking for any kind of financial match or anything. It's free, which is there.
Do you have any idea what your pot of money will be?
Yes.
What is it?
It's enough to fund the studies.
But can you share the amount?
The whole contract was, well, 400,000.
Okay.
But Not
So,
sure.
but that's the amount of money that would be divvied up between the people who are awarded.
Well, that's funding the whole plan, the implementation strategy and so forth. Part of that will go for the 4 pilots. And it's kind of dependent on what the needs are of those 4 pilots. So it will probably vary for each one.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, great. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Last item, agenda item number 10, our coordinated public transit human services transportation plan update. Is Emma here? There's Emma. Welcome, Emma. Now, no pressure, but you're like the last thing that stands between the staff and a holiday, okay? So
I can
just-
appreciate that it's after 8 p.m. So I really appreciate all y'all's time, and I will hit the highlights, and if you have any questions, I'll take them at the end. But without further ado, I'm here to present an informational presentation on the Coordinated Public Transit Human Services Transportation Plan. There really isn't a better way to say the acronym for that either, so I would just say Coordinated Plan for simplicity. So essentially, CATS just undertook updating our locally coordinated plan, which is a federally mandated plan to allocate resources to or transportation funding to individuals with disabilities and seniors. And so the MTC approved this coordinated plan on May 28th. And we also like to have your endorsement because although we'll bring that back at the next meeting, this is informational only. But it covers the entire urban area. So I'll get to 5310 funding in a second about how that works. But essentially, this plan, you can use it to apply for projects within this urban area up on the map. So what is a coordinated plan? Like I said, it's a federally required plan for focusing on the transportation needs of older adults and individuals with disabilities. And its purpose is to assess transportation services that are currently available, but also identify unmet needs and identify coordination opportunities and also strategies to, to actually meet those transportation needs. So what CATS does, so CATS is technically the designated recipient for Section 5310 funds. And so currently in FY24, which is the last full award announced by FTA, we have about a little over 1.3 million to award out. And that call for the FY24 funding will actually be around August 1st. So any projects, starting or ending or happening in the urban area that meet the criteria of the grant are eligible. And so essentially the coordinated plan, it identifies projects that you can apply for funding for that. So the study process, we had stakeholder engagement. So one component of the coordinated plan, aside from identifying the needs of seniors and individuals with disabilities in the urban area for transportation needs, we also were thinking about program management internally. And so we conducted virtual interviews, our consultant did with regional planning organizations, transit agencies, and nonprofit agencies. A few of the needs and gaps were up on the screen were identified, such as, talking about mobility hubs, first and last mile connections, or a need for enhanced interagency scheduling capabilities and things of that sort. We also held public engagement. And so we held a virtual session and an in-person meeting. That was back in November 2024. Our in-person meeting was at Ellis Scarborough Community Resource Center. And between the two events, we had about 150 participants. We had a lot of good conversations, especially at the in-person session. Public feedback included, a focus on the I-485 loop and having bus service out to the edges of the I-485 loop. And improved trip planning options and transfer opportunities. There was also a lot of conversation around microtransit, and I'll get into that more in a moment. So I definitely tried to compact down the recommendations for tonight, knowing there was a long agenda. So broadly, there are 5 recommendation themes that came out of the plan. The first is mobility management and agency coordination. So this focuses on unifying transit policies, improving cross-county trip coordination, and enhancing collaboration, for example. Mobility management is one of those odd terms that is actually a type of project under the 5310 program that's eligible for funding. So if your agency is doing any transit coordinating activities, this may be funding that you may be interested in. There's also, service expansion, aiming to increase the availability of fixed route and on-demand transit, reducing wait times, things that come straight to mind. Additionally, information sharing, so enhancing how riders access information, how they pay for services. Maybe that's through like apps or, through operator training, things like that. Connectivity and safety, so back to the mobility hubs, actually getting to and from the bus stop or to and from where you're boarding a paratransit van is critical. And then lastly, microtransit, with the advent of a few microtransit services in the area recently. A lot of people were eager to talk about this and were optimistic about its potential to promote flexible on-demand service to fill in service gaps that fixed route can't necessarily meet. So with that said, I promise I would keep it fairly short. The final plan materials will be available on our website at the link on the screen. And we will be coming back in July for endorsement. But also, if you have any questions or about the 5310 program, about the coordinated plan, you can reach out to me in my email or my boss, Brian Horton, also. So with that said, any questions?
Great job, Emma. Questions? Mr. Jones?
Yes. Was ICATS a part of the planning process?
Yes, ICATS, we talked with them during the stakeholder interviews virtually and so currently, one of the reasons we updated the plan too was that the urban area changed with the 2020 census. And so parts of Iredell County won't be eligible for the funding anymore, at least until the 2030 census. But there are sections of Iredell County that are still eligible in the southern portion. But we talked extensively with ICATS about our program management and about their thoughts on the plan.
Right. Other questions? Yes, Mr. Holmes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll make this quick. I had a question about stakeholder engagement. So, well, I guess really two-part question. How were the stakeholders identified?
So the purpose of the plan is to mostly target seniors and individuals with disabilities. We didn't do too extensive of public engagement because this is more of an update. And so when we went to the LOB Scarborough Resource Center, that accommodated a lot of different kinds of needs. And so we tried to choose a place where those populations were frequenting and had good access to public transit options to get there.
Okay, so in addition to that, I guess what I'm trying to say is, did you engage stakeholders throughout the entire service area?
Yes. Well, we had a virtual session to try to accommodate people who couldn't make it in person. We did some other engagement, like some pop-ups on the side. One of them was at one of the senior centers down towards South Charlotte, but we didn't really get a lot of interest in going to various locations. But we put feelers out there to see if anybody wanted us to show up to their meetings, but we didn't really get a response to that necessarily.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, comments? Okay, great presentation. We'll see you in July.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Moving on, Neil, let us know about our upcoming agenda items.
The July 16th CRTPO board agenda is anticipated to include action to open a public comment period on a project list that we will consider submitting to NCDOT for prioritization 8.0 to develop the next step. We also have action requested of what we just heard here to endorse the coordinated public transit human services transportation plan update. And then we'll have information reports on the 2026-2035 draft TIP, as well as a public comment summary on the 2055 MTP comment period on the fiscally constrained roadway and transit projects. And that's all I have at this point.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And to close us out, the all-important question was, how are we going to fund all of the different projects we've heard about? So we're so blessed to have the chair of the NCDOT board as part of our group here. So Mr. Lather, anything to share tell us about the golden rule. Do we have any gold?
Yep, it'd be very, very quick. I know I'm the only thing standing between you all and bedtime or whatever else. Even though I've just become the chair, I've been on the board for 8 years and been the finance chair for those 8 years. I'm still Division 10, and I think there's advantages to having
your board member as the chair. That's beyond the scope of this, but I, I shout out to Stephen. We are working on emphasizing some priorities as I move into this role, around funding, project delivery, DMV, economic development, and some other things like that. We've got 4 new members and working to get the board more engaged as opposed to just voting every month on the projects. But in terms of my time, I got something from the staff on my way over here saying I have 6 calls I have to make tomorrow, is just because I'm chair. So there's an overlay there, but I'm here for Division 10 and the CRTPO.
We're grateful.
So that's all for that piece, but about the revenue conversation. So I know you were curious about that, but the state as a whole is really a victim of our own success in that we're growing like crazy. And it's not just Charlotte, it's mainly the big metro areas, but the Triangle area, even Wilmington, Asheville, the Triad, and all of those areas have a radius around it, kind of what you consider their economy. So it's everywhere. And overlaid on that is the disruption caused by electric vehicles and technology and such that are eventually going to start to affect our revenue stream. So the conversation about where to get more money, let me back up. Every year we do around 4 billion in capital projects, about, give or take, Stephen, right? And at any given time, we've got committed about $9 billion in capital projects because they're constantly getting done and new ones are getting, and that's across the state. But the need is well north of 100 billion, statewide. It's just, there's so many projects that are needed. And so there's an ongoing conversation about the revenue model. And I was on a task force called NC First to talk about solutions to that. And somebody alluded to the fact that the legislature has allocated about 600 million every year from the general fund and sales tax revenues that are estimated to come from things that relate to transportation, like auto parts and tires and things like that. But there's no easy answer, so we continue this conversation. The NC First Commission has all kinds of materials still on our website about ideas about how to increase revenue, like to increase the highway use tax, which is what is paid when you sell a car. Of course, there's powerful interests that are against any kind of change in that. So there's political overlays on all this, but we're looking for creative ways to pay for this, hence the discussion about P3s when we have $3 billion projects. And yet we have a corridor cap of 600 million, which is what we can put in to 77. So we're dealing with that all over the state. And so there's an interest in toll financing. And there's a bill in the legislature right now. Right now, we're limited to only 3 public-private partnerships across the state, but there's a move to increase that so we can do more of that. And so there's an ongoing conversation about all those ideas to raise more revenue on a statewide basis. And, I would encourage y'all to talk with your legislators about that, because ultimately it's up to them. In my role, I can help keep that conversation going and want to do that. So that's the goal. And, I think, we've seen and those of you who have been in office for a while have seen ideas that were hatched and then gradually get more and more education behind them and more consensus, and they come to fruition, like the bill for the sales tax here. that, I can remember when it was a gleam in Ed Driggs's eye. So, if we have these conversations and we continue these kinds of conversations around what's going to happen to our revenue model, how are we going to handle all these needs? And then we're constantly looking for creative ways to use the revenue streams we've got. We will make progress, but it's in the short term, I know it can be frustrating. Thank you.
Tell us the good news.
I'm chair.
Okay, there we go. That's our good news for tonight. Great. Good. Councilmember Altman. Mhm.
Thank you. We are so lucky to have you still participating here, so I will take advantage of having your expertise to explain to me, when I hear that the General Assembly has, made the plans and we're headed towards a zero corporate tax rate. And then I hear we've got, 100 million, well, I forgot exactly what you said, in expenses. It's just, no, I think you said billion. What, it was billion.
It was a B.
It was a billion. It was a B. I guess I don't understand why they continue to cut taxes when on the other hand, we have this critical shortage in funding for infrastructure. Like, these are different buckets of money. Is it just, political that they don't review the wisdom of continuing to cut taxes when we can't fund basic infrastructure? Like, what's your view on that? How do you sort of respond to the choices they're making around reducing the corporate tax rate while we cannot fund basic infrastructure?
Well, my number one thought is that really is a separate bucket. It truly is. I mean, our money comes out of dedicated revenue streams primarily from the gas tax, but also from DMV license plate tags, from the highway use tax. And then we get federal money from the federal gas tax. So, and then we get, miscellaneous grants from the feds and things like that to top off our top line. So, that's kind of like apples and oranges is my view. That the general fund doesn't pay for infrastructure. And I kind of like it that way. I mean, I think in the old days, sometimes they would take infrastructure money to use for non-infrastructure things. And now they have started giving us some general fund money, that's 600 million a year in sales tax revenues towards infrastructure. So it's not life-changing, but it is not chump change either.
Could I
Yeah.
comment on that as well? The idea was to try to align the burden of the cost of that infrastructure with the use of the infrastructure. So that was the model. And they're struggling to abandon that and to go to just a general fund thing. So in economic terms, it all comes down to the incidence of the cost. The legislature has run surpluses, created a rainy day fund. North Carolina has benefited from being a friendly business environment. And I don't want to get political about it, but I'm just saying there was a logic to the way they dealt with those things. And what we're stuck with is this question of how to pay for these infrastructure investments when the old model of the gas tax and so on used to be sufficient or even generate funds that were invaded. And they've dipped their toe in the water by accessing 600 million of general fund money. But that does mean that taxpayers are paying according to their tax obligation for these roads and things. And it gets away from the alignment of the cost with the use. And I think that's one of the reasons I've supported the P3 is because that aligns the cost with the use. And of course has the effect of having a lot of people from out of state help pay for it too.
Thank you.
Mayor Knox.
So I've been a realtor for 30 years and when you talk about being the victim of our own success, part of that success used to help pay for infrastructure when we had impact fees. And when the home builders lobby went to Raleigh and had impact fees repealed, said it was disingenuous to the developers. I've been a developer. I've sold land for development and I've sold houses. The developer's not doing that. They're passing that on to the consumer. And as long as we're going to continue to be a victim of our own success, we're never going to catch up with the curve. It's the gas tax is not supplanting it enough as it is. Alternate financing, alternate funding sources. There's one thing to consider. I still think that the impact fees that we collected, they went for roads, they went for sidewalks, they went for parks, they went for schools. And those funds disappeared. And so those funds have to be made up in some other manner. And that's where some of the funding that comes out of our sales taxes and gas taxes and everything else is had to shift. And again, I still think that that's something that's got to be revisited at some point is the impact fees that developers paid could be one of those alternate funding or additional funding sources to help bring us closer to the curve as we continue to grow.
Yep, that's a very good point. And there is a distinction between town of Davidson streets and town of Davidson infrastructure and state-owned infrastructure. And sometimes it overlaps where you've got like 21 that goes through Davidson or, yeah, 115. So, but that, you know, that's a well-taken point for that piece of it. I wish, but I don't think DOT could get that money.
All right, well, we'll look forward to another.
Quick comment, I'm sorry, and I know we have to get.
Is there anybody else wants to comment? No, I'm just teasing.
Sorry. Similarly, there's a bill, I believe is going through the Senate right now that would potentially strip the local town's rights for land use planning essentially. So here we have a situation where the state's not able to provide the funds for the infrastructure that's needed, and at the same time, it's taking away a town's rights to, protect itself from losing quality of life because the infrastructure can't be supported by the state. So I would request that, I don't know if it's something that this board, is able to do or wants to do, but since we're intimately familiar with these challenges that we consider, not supporting, making a statement of non-support for what's being passed through the Senate right now.
Well, let me just be
currently. Let me just let you know, we don't do any resolutions in opposition or in approval or support of any legislation, but I would encourage every town. We took a resolution on Monday against that.
For the record, that used to be, I think it was Senate Bill 765. It is now morphed into Senate Bill 205.
House bill.
So House bills, sorry. So. Senate Bill 205. So it's in the Senate, it's 205 right now. Something about swimming pools.
Yeah.
But
And
that's
just to
where,
be
that's where it's at today. So.
clear for the record, I
Ready to
think in
look
the
at
same vein as what you were saying, pun intended, that's not my lane. Oh.
There you go. He would love to help, but can't on that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super. Great conversation. I was remiss in asking after Emma's presentation, is there any opposition to that being on the consent agenda next month? Not that we wouldn't love to see Emma again, but just in the interest of her time of overtime for the city, anything like that. Anybody have any opposition with that? Great. We'll go ahead and put that on consent next month. And with that, we will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We've got a first and a second. All those in favor? Anybody opposed? Have a safe night home.
Love talking about that stuff, but it's frustrating. It's